Well, it's clearly an intrusion by the judiciary into a legislative process issue. I mean, in looking at the order, the note that, or the phrase on page 5 that was probably the most important one to me was, because the legislative session had ended, there was no opportunity for the legislature to attempt to override this veto or to continue to work on a compromise. Since when does a district court judge insert herself into the legislative process and suggest, as I believe you correctly stated, has she determined that the pocket veto is unconstitutional? Because that's in effect what she's telling us, is that just because the Democrats in the majority in the Senate and the House failed to run the business of the legislature in an appropriate fashion, they in effect ran out the clock on themselves. Now we've got a district court judge who's saying, hey, wait a second, that's so unfair that they weren't able to take care of the business that they were supposed to have been taken care of. And now just because the governor did what he was supposed to do, which, by the way, she says a page earlier, I think it is, very clearly, she adds, we conclude that Minnesota Statute 16A.152 does not reflect an unconstitutional delegation of legislative power. This is the unallotment provision. And it's interesting because our media doesn't even point out that what the judge said was the unallotment process is constitutional. They are leaving it vague so that the average citizen out there thinks, oh, maybe there was something wrong with what the governor did with unallotment. In fact, it's just the opposite. As the district court judge wrote in her supporting memorandum, it enables the executive to protect the state from financial crisis in a manner designated by the legislature. In other words, if we can just paraphrase, the governor has the power to unallot when he is acting to protect us from our pending financial doom or financial crisis. And I'm just going to give the quote. This is from the district court's memorandum in support of the order granting a TRO, which I think was a mistake. But the order says that remains the settled law, which means unallotment remains constitutional. The settled law in the state of Minnesota, and it would be improper for this court to revisit the constitutionality of the unallotment statute itself. Quote unquote, it is constitutional. Both sides can take a little of the responsibility, but the reality is Republicans weren't running the place. The Democrats are in charge, and they've got more than enough votes to pass anything that they need to get to the governor's desk. They could have started doing it back in January. They could have done it in February or March. But no, instead they waited until the absolute last second. And you know what? That's not leadership. I think it's more appropriate if we call it a failure of leadership, a lack of vision. The governor's got a constitutional obligation to put out a balanced budget very early in the session, within about 4 or 5 weeks. The governor will put out a budget by the end of January, early February. And at that point, it's always seemed to me that the legislature should put out its proposals so that we can compare apples to apples and oranges to oranges, so we can figure out where we agree and disagree, figure out our priorities, and get the business of the legislature, the business of the people, done quickly and efficiently. Okay? But that doesn't happen. Instead, we work on everything but the budget, it seems like, until the last night of session. And then somebody picks up a bill at 11:30 at night and holds it up and says to everybody on the other side of the aisle, you must vote for this, otherwise you're going to hurt school kids. You must vote for this, otherwise you're going to hurt seniors or the disabled. You're going to hurt people if you don't agree with our proposals, even though you've been there for 5 months and had a chance to do this. I offered a bill last January, which I think would give the governor an added tool that could solve this problem, this delay, this waiting, this political gamesmanship. What it would propose is the governor would have another tool, a tool where the governor could declare a fiscal emergency. Imagine a world where the governor would have to put out a budget by the end of January, early February, and then would have this added tool, where he or she could declare the fiscal emergency the very first day of session, if it was appropriate. Then the legislature, under this added legislation, this law, would have 45 days to present its balanced budget. Imagine a world where the governor's budget is out by the end of January, early February, and the legislature has to put out a balanced budget by the middle of February to the end of February. Now you would have all of March, April, and May to get your differences resolved. That should be plenty of time, and it should eliminate this last minute, whatever you want to call it, the last minute, this is what we have to do, otherwise we're going to hurt people. I just think we would avoid special sessions, we would be able to get the business of the people done, and we would get the partisanship out of the way, because we will have talked our differences through well in advance of that last night of session. And I think that is the future for the state of Minnesota.